You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterbutchers.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knife here with always
typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1992 made-for-TV classic GhostWatch. Boom, 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 boom.
That's not bad pipes sounds, sir.
Yeah, and I did it with my pipes.
Yeah, you did it with your pipes. If you can't tell, Wes and I are recording live and in person. And hopefully that doesn't trick you into thinking that we're actually live coming through your ear holes right now, live, like GhostWatch tricked over 1 million people. Now we're actually sitting in the same room though, which is eerie, scary thing to begin with. We haven't shared space in meat space for years.
Literally years. You would never know that Lydia just lives up the road from me. Really.
Yeah.
It's about a 10-minute drive with traffic. Mm-hmm. But yet ever since the pandemic, and I meant to go back and look at our episodes about which was the first episode we did where we were no longer in a room together before we had our nice setup that we have now. It had to have been sometime in 2020. So it had to have been, we either would have recorded our Christmas or New Year's episode, and then when from 2019 to 2020, the pandemic happened in those early years, and maybe we did one more episode together before lockdown. Maybe, because we were also recording more sporadically. That this was kind of where we were, I don't know, if we were both feeling burnt out or if life just got really busy for both of us. But the podcast went on a hiatus for over a year.
Yeah, and that could have very well been at that point, because I know at the time the pandemic hit in March, it was a Friday the 13th. It was the last day that I had an office or seeing my students, because I was teaching, of course, working full time and taking French classes. Aside from all the other volunteer and fun stuff I do, like this show. And I started ramping up the typical book show at that time because I was stuck at home. We weren't recording a lot. And I remember you saying, like, yeah, you've been doing a lot of the show. And I said, like, yeah, now I have more time to do Dead Air and we can figure out a remote way to do this. I couldn't pinpoint the first episode though, and you had guessed somewhere around the Madman Mars episode. That might have been the first one we did.
Maybe it might have been Madman, it might have been Piranha. It was sometime during summer. I remember that.
So we would have sat out that whole winter.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was over a year. I'm sure of it. It was over a year. I remember listeners, people that I had never even, sometimes we were people who are regular listeners generally contact us fairly regularly, but there's people that I had never even heard, I'd never seen their usernames before, and they're like, hey, where's your episodes? Why are you guys still doing the show? And I guess if someone asked me directly, do you still do that podcast? I would have said yes.
Yes.
Also, we just haven't done an episode in a while, and I don't know.
Yeah, that would have been my answer as well, too. I don't think that I even ever said outside of you or I or our loved ones that we were on a hiatus of any sort, because we would, plan to make an episode and like pick movies, and then 3 months would pass, and then maybe like, when are you good to record? Oh, maybe next month. Okay, well, let's see. So it was very up in the air, very, very up in the air. But this was also a lot of things up in the air for people. So, we give each other a lot of slack when it comes to that sort of thing. Even recently, where it's like, typically we hit the 2 weeks mark and then sometimes we just don't. and it's no big deal. So hopefully with our listeners, they cut us the same amount of slack and can be like, hey, remember that time they disappeared for a year? We can deal with like a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's funny I sometimes I get asked in real life by other people who want to make content online or are just starting out, and the number one question I get is, how do you do it consistently? How do you do it all the time and not miss a mark? Generally speaking, we don't. We've been doing this for over 10 years, and aside from that year hiatus, we were pretty consistent. And my response to them and to all you listeners, if you want to do this type of stuff, is you just got to do it. That's really just it. You just got to do it. You can't wait to feel like it. The stars are not going to align. You're never not going to be tired, or you're never not going to have a million other things to do. You just got to do it. And part of it is keeping your promises to your listeners. And I had a promise that I made 1 year ago today. Well, depending on when this episode comes out, probably around Halloween proper. I promised, after doing all of the episodes for Halloween that we've done that were found footage, documentary style, things that were taking place on Halloween night, I had neglected the fact, or we had neglected the fact, that we had missed one of the biggest and one of the oldest documentary style, almost found footage style. This is real, or is it? Takes place on Halloween night. Spooky things are afoot. And that is, of course, why I said we should do GhostWatch. And here we are, keeping our promises.
This is now a new favorite because unlike people who had this show mythologized to them, and I'm going to want to call it a movie, I'm probably going to call it a movie. It wasn't necessarily taken as a movie. It was taken as a live broadcast, even though it was a TV movie in the drama slot on BBC One. So like it is a film, but it is a TV show. It was a broadcast, but it was mistaken for live television. We weren't subject to the mythologization of this show. I didn't hear about the show till it hit Shudder, but apparently in I think around 2007, Scream. Do you remember Scream?
I do remember Scream.
Canadian horror channel. If for those who don't recall, I missed Scream. That became Dusk for a while and then was off the air entirely, I guess.
I don't think it's around anymore yet.
They showed GhostWatch in 2007. I'd never heard of it still, though, until Shudder showed it to us. And wow, I had wished, and I still wish, that I had been on the ground floor of this.
I'm in the same boat. I discovered this one day when turning on Shudder, and this was a couple of years ago at this point, where it had come on, and I don't know what caused me to pick it amongst all of the other tiles that are in front of your face, but something about seeing a bunch of stuffy Brits with some plain black background. GhostWatch, what could this be? And I read the description, and I didn't really understand the extent of the, shall we say, War of the Worlds aspect to this film that did exist historically, but I decided that it was exactly what I was in the mood for at the time, and it really did stick with me as something very entertaining, very unique, and it did give you a sense that you had missed something, because probably more so if you actually are a person who lived in the UK at the time. This seems like such a time capsule of that very specific point in broadcast history of the BBC.
Not only because of the mentions of the BBC, the look of the technology, the look of the things that they were using. We were listening to a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff, and there were like in camera transitions or production transitions that they were going to try out next week on Top of the Pops that they used in GhostWatch. And it was all very exciting. So, like, those sorts of things really earmark a specific week in BBC history. And the personalities that we're dealing with. Parkinson, guy that had been on British television for quite some time. There was the Mike Smith, I suppose his name is. he had been on BBC for quite some time. The children's presenter, the guy from Red Dwarf. Like, there's all kinds of people who were on television that fucking week in different shows that everyone would have recognized.
Which would have contributed greatly to some people being fooled. And historically speaking, when you think back to what we as Westerners would probably consider the most convincing accidental hoax, which was the broadcast of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that was something that I had even heard of as a very young child. We all knew. And it definitely seemed as though the world went into a panic when this broadcast happened. Then years later, I remember listening to the broadcast for the first time when I was in college and having more historical context and a little bit more sense of what it was actually like, in which case some people definitely thought it was real. Because if you were to listen to the entire broadcast of War of the Worlds, it becomes fairly obvious within the first 15-20 minutes or so that, yeah, okay, you're watching something that is not actually real. I don't care how many times Orson Welles throws to a symphony broadcast. It becomes very clear that, okay, I'm listening to actors, and Orson Welles is now playing a character, and I get it. I completely understand.
It's not a news broadcast.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I would wager that this was the same kind of thing, right? Like perhaps people were more fooled initially than they were if they had actually stuck with the broadcast for more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
If they were an adult of a certain disposition, yes. If they're an adult of a certain disposition, perhaps not.
That's
Now, I've
true.
pulled up the 1992 October BBC program, and they had two alternate shows showing, much like they do here for Newfoundland, where something's delayed by a half hour, so they have the two different feeds. But on screen one, BBC Series 4 GhostWatch, 1 hour and 31 minutes. On October 31st, 1992, airing at 21:25 on BBC One in London. In North London, Mrs. Pamela Early and her two daughters, Suzanne and Kim, are desperate to be rehoused by the council. So it's already reading kind of like a drama.
Yes.
For months, their house has been made practically unlivable by strange noise, awful smells, breaking crockery, and puddles forming out of nowhere. Is Mrs. Early an hysterical attention seeker, or is she really at the center of inexplicable events? Dr. Pascoe, eminent parapsychologist, decides to harness the resources of the BBC and investigate. Presenter, Michael Parkinson. Reporter, Sarah Green. Phone-in presenter, Mike Smith. So it's giving cast, but it says contributors, right? So contributors makes you think, okay, well, these are the people starring in the documentary style investigation that the BBC is conducting this weekend or whenever. I don't know what day of the week that was. But anyway, interviewer Craig Charles would be like, oh, that guy, that comedian, Dr. Lynn Pascoe, whoever the hell, but they give the name of the actress, Gillian Bevan. So there's a clue a week out that this is fiction, unless who's reading this shit that closely? Nobody.
That's true.
Writer Stephen Volk, producer Ruth Baumgarten, director Leslie Manning. Thank you, those three people, for bringing us GhostWatch, by the way. Genres: drama, horror, and supernatural. So, in the TV guide a week out, we have kind of a clue as to the nature of this drama, this horror supernatural drama. But who reads that closely?
Yeah, that's true. Or who's going to remember it? You're perusing those things for something to watch now, and you read the blurb and you remember the names that you see all the time, which would be the real names of the actual BBC broadcasters. And you're going to maybe not read the rest, and also the credit of contributor is weird. That's really strange. Who is called a contributor That's nothing. Like, that's absolutely nothing. Um, you, if you wanted to indicate fully that it was actors, they were playing roles, appearing as themselves.
Yes.
That's the credit that you use. You don't say contributor. Or you could even go so far as like playing versions of themselves, something along those lines. Now, I'm not going so far as to say, well, they are going the Blair Witch route or snuff, where they're saying this is real, this happened, taking place in London where life is cheap. No, that's a snuff line.
Is definitely yes, but it seemed to be, life is cheap because we're calling this Foxhill, wherever that is in London. It
Mhm.
may exist, it might not. Does it look like every house you've ever seen? Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Have you heard stories of like the corpses of children being found underneath buildings for like decades, if not centuries, and no one really cares? Yeah, absolutely. So this happens all over the place. Are there 5-year-olds getting stabbed down the road? Yeah, all the time. Like yeah, even though it is civilized London, this is a TV program of a single mother and her 2 kids that seems very regular, very workaday, someone you may know, someone who emulates your own life, who you feel might live next door to you. It is still kind of gives a feeling of life is cheap.
It also should be said that a lot of the promotional images and the storyline that they are using is very reminiscent of that case that the Warrens did.
The
All of the
Enfield poltergeist, yeah.
Exactly. Look at those photos that they use, like with the pillow and all that. Does that see with the girls being terrorized on their beds? Does that not look almost exactly like the photo of the girl? We now know jumping to make it look as though she's levitating, but all of it seems so reminiscent. So if this wouldn't even be the first time that people in the UK would have heard a story almost identical to this. And maybe even some who were fooled in the back of their minds were half remembering this case from the Warrens. And this sounds almost identical.
Yeah, yeah, and you think almost maybe there's a pandemic of
Mhm.
hauntings, not a pandemic of hoax hauntings, not a pandemic of stories that influence other writers to write similar stories. Especially since because like we say in the beginning of GhostWatch, there's no like haunted castles here,
Mhm.
no ghosts in white floating down ancient hallways. It's a contemporary story which people really like were sinking their teeth into at the time. As far as parapsychology too, it was a new thing. It was a renaissance of that in a way from the seance era of the 50s.
Fuck all that, Lydia. What is this movie even about, anyways?
This movie is about how sometimes, yes, like they say in the film, you're manifesting the ghost by imitating it. So maybe it's not a hoax necessarily. And maybe your ghost itself needs to be haunted too. And you've got like layers of fake hauntings under real hauntings with hauntings upon hauntings that are haunted.
Well, there there is a narrative turducken aspect of this film when it comes to the background of pipes. Um, you knew somebody who watched this live.
I did. And oh my, I listened to a really cool podcast called Knock at the Door, I think it's called, that talks about other people and their own experiences being about 11 years old watching this. And my friend Alex, the bookubist, you may know from BookTube, Alex actually witnessed this broadcast as an 11-year-old girl at maybe a Halloween party or something like that. And while it's absolutely Alex's story to tell, and I've heard her mention it before, like she's even put a tweet out once and Stephen Volk responded, and it was just like a hero moment. It was really cool. But yeah, I got a chance to kind of question her a little bit about what it was like, what the recollections are, and sort of have a conversation about like had I witnessed this at this age, I would have definitely believed it was real. And yeah, she watched it, thought it was real, can't quite pinpoint when she figured out it wasn't, or if it was like, there was news articles about it afterward. Being 11 years old, that's not like the number one thing you're paying attention to, right? All you know is that you saw this crazy, scary ghost show on TV on Halloween one night, and it was a real, real haunting that happened in London. Like anyone, like millions of people, definitely believed it. Uh, the credits weren't helpful, and like I thought, if I had watched it at 11 years old, the credits wouldn't be very helpful. One of my bigger questions was like, were there other people around in the room? And that was one thing that I was talking to Chris about it. That's what he would want to know. Like, what was the feedback from other people? And in the podcast, they talk about the kids talking about it at school the next day. But because it was probably like a Halloween party or a sleepover atmosphere, there were no parents in the room to, for one, turn the TV off, which a lot of people did have happen, or explain it away, or become incensed and furious and call the BBC to be told that it's a hoax, it's okay, which doesn't help. In the podcast I was listening to, someone's parent did call at the time in the show where you see Suzanne banging on the pipes, and they were calling the BBC at that time, who was saying, it's okay, it's a hoax. So the kids watching were told it was a hoax by the BBC themselves, and thought, okay, the girl, what she's doing is the hoax portion of it, but it doesn't explain everything that happened beforehand. And the pipe banging we hear while she's in her bedroom. So it's real. And it really is a live television broadcast. We're going to stick with it and see what else happens. Because they didn't understand that the whole thing was a hoax, right? Like Alex, down to earth, intelligent. She didn't watch it again until about 20 years after. So she would have been in her 30s before she watched this again. Somewhere in there was when she knew that it wasn't real. There's two really important Mandela effects related to GhostWatch. One is that people swore the next year they rebroadcast it again. GhostWatch has never, apparently, been rebroadcast in the UK. And the other one is that they swore that on a kids' show a week earlier, they were told that there would be a live ghost hunt on the BBC, which apparently wasn't true. They never said it was live. They never said on a kids' show that you should tune in. So yeah, really just a fascinating thing. And I think that having that sort of fandom around it, not only a podcast, mass seances, people who still remember, because millions of people witnessed this show, and a lot of them seem to be kids, to know someone that actually sat on a living room floor watching this at 9 p.m. in BBC back in 1992 is just super cool to me.
It is really cool, and it's a bit of a touchstone where it makes it all so much more real, because sometimes when we hear stories about horror and how it interacts with audiences, either the War of the Worlds aspect that I was just mentioning, people fainting at the premiere of 1931's Frankenstein and Dracula, and it can seem so remote and implausible. And oh, come on, that didn't really happen. That's just how they're promoting themselves to get people interested. But then to have somebody that sat there and watched the broadcast, and will say right now, uh, and I believe I've said this before, I'm a very gullible person. And I would have been about 9 years old when this would have originally come up. And I know, having been fooled by such faux documentaries as The Legend of Boggy Creek, having been fooled by early found footage samplings like The Last Broadcast and the McPherson tape, I know for 100% I would have been fooled by this. I would have been convinced that finally there was concrete evidence of the supernatural.
I think that, I don't know, I keep saying I want to be that 11-year-old kid watching this, and I would have believed the hell out of this. When it broadcast, I was 17, apparently.
Yeah.
A little older than I think I thought I would have been. But if my math is right anyway. Um, I don't know if that at that age I would have. I might have. It probably wouldn't have helped because I'd be watching it with my mom, who was twinsies with you, who would be watching this going, "Oh my God, it's really real." She's the girl that watched The Curse of the Blair Witch and said, like, why is no one out there looking for these kids? Right? Like she believe, especially when it's a faux documentary style. Watching Blair Witch, she wouldn't have believed it that it was found footage, I don't think. But you give a few talking heads, a few experts, a call-in number that actually was a real call-in number, apparently. And that probably fed the believability of it all, is that people a week later had seen this exact same number up on the BBC to call into Crime Watch. So it's got to be real, right? So my mom would have definitely swallowed it. So even if I were 17 sitting there with my mom going, it's really real, I might have been tipped into believing it. And even whether it's 11 or 17, I don't think the credits would have helped me understand that it was false, that it was a drama.
Yeah. There was a comedy, found like a faux documentary comedy in the late 90s called Fubar, and I was fooled by that too. And it wasn't until I thought that the main character had really gotten cancer and through chemo lost his hair but managed to not lose his mustache. And it wasn't until they showed photos of him getting into makeup for the movie during the credits that I said, "Oh, this is a movie." I and nowadays, gang, just so you know, I don't get fooled by such things anymore. But I was very young when all of these found footage movies were starting to come out, and if somebody told me that this was real, even if it was part of the marketing, I wanted. I was that kid that wanted to order the alien autopsy footage from like Area 51. I was just this kid that was so ready for ghosts and aliens and the paranormal and Bigfoot and fucking all of it, that I wanted to believe I was the fucking poster from the X-Files.
Yeah.
This film begins with Michael Parkinson, stoic, British. He looks like he smells of tea and dust, and he always has a gentle clock ticking behind him wherever he's speaking. He introduces us to the family at Foxhill who has been tormented by this entity that the children are referring to as pipes. It bangs on the pipes.
Yeah, which is a perfect little name for this entity, because anything else might have been like the kids knew too much or had done some research. If they're naming it after like sort of the onomatopoeia of what they're hearing, yeah, pipes is a weird little name.
Well, it'd be like if you had a white cat and you named it Snowball. It's it's just kids are going to be kids, and it's like, oh, he's banging on the pipes, is he? Oh. The mother is Pamela Early, and she is wanting this show GhostWatch to bring to light that her daughters and her are not making this up. This is like we said, like that case with the Warrens. It's this idea where the British tabloids have had their way with them and called them crazy or getting them a whole bunch of negative attention. And she knows what she's hearing and experiencing. Her daughters know what they're hearing and experiencing. And so now it's time to finally bring to light all of these supernatural goings on. And the BBC has brought in all the experts, or one expert.
Well, one expert and a few call-ins, because I mean they're utilizing the state-of-the-art technology. They have a sit-down talking head with this Pasco, this professional that has worked with the family. They have somebody from the Center for Psychical Research, which is a real place, out in the van helping with the call-ins. And they have a few people that they're going to call off to. One guy in New York that is just the biggest skeptic, and believable though. Like, it's all very believable, and they are, you might have mistaken them for other people in other ghost research shows. Now, granted, it would have been like the Ghosts of England DVDs that I think I still have a copy of, where it's, fusty dudes in tweed jackets strolling down echoing hallways of giant estates, cottages, manor houses, castles, even talking about long, long, long dead spirits and nothing happening on screen. So it is a way more updated version of that, but they have old Parky, apparently, as they called him, talking in that fusty, dusty way that is very approachable to many people who are used to hearing ghost stories on television or ghost stories for Christmas in the very BBC way. They need that as an anchor for all of this.
There's something, I believe you referred to him as unflappable while we were watching the movie, and he is really that. The look on his face goes from serious to mildly amused to somewhat irritated, and it's such a subtlety, and he's so non-declarative. He's always just musing. He's asking questions. He wants to get to the bottom of things. He's trying very hard to be the captain of this ship. He is the person that is, we're looking at Foxhill. Now we're taking calls. Now we are talking to our expert. Now we're talking to our skeptic. He is going to be routinely making these types of decisions, whether the idea is that a producer is speaking in his ear, which at some points he is like, we're getting information here now, what we're going to do. And so the thing that I find so fascinating about this film is its pacing. This film, sometimes, gang, you might hear me say that a joke where things are really bombastic and fast and quick editing, where I'm like, this movie's not even waiting for you to watch it. This movie is waiting for you to watch it. Not only is it waiting for you to watch it, take your time. We are going to, befuddle our way through conversations. We are going to leisurely walk from point A to point B. There is no there is no point in which wasted time would be cut. Do we need a person, the outside broadcaster, to take literally a 45-second jog to go do an interview with somebody who, for whatever reason, they didn't cut to him already there, or bring her to him? No, he is going to run there. Do you want to see this old British man sort of look through a small box of broken dishes and just say, oh, how extraordinary this is. This is broken. And now this one's broken too. And look at this, also broken. How do you think these got broken? Heat, you say. Oh, this is rather extraordinary. They just it's wild. If you're the type of person that has a hard time paying attention to things, I highly suggest put your phone away and just dial in, because this film is really going to be showing you a lot and really lending itself to this authenticity by how it does seem like it's going on live, and they are rolling with the punches and trying to keep things on track, but at the same time, even in their narrative, admitting that they're probably going to go over their allotted time and we're just going to stay with the story as long as we need to. And so whatever show was coming on after this, that's not happening anymore. It really is fascinating to watch. And to me, as somebody who understands that the most precious thing for broadcasters is how the audience is spending their time with you, these people don't give a fuck. They're just like, we don't care if there's long bouts of silence. We don't care if you're looking at something that looks like it is falling apart on live TV. That's the point.
I think a lot of the technology being fairly new as far as electronic news gathering, some of the things that they were showing off at the beginning, because it does sort of start out like we're now used to a lot of these faux ghost hunting shows. Um, Grave Encounters starts out a lot like this, and so do a lot of the other ones where it's like, here's all our gear, here's where we're putting our cameras, this is our newfangled piece of fucking technological bullshit that we're pulling out of our back pockets for this show. So you guys all get to see the world premiere of this fantastical fucking gadget. They do that with the whole like what was new at the time with infrared photography, being able to see the heat sources on screen. The fact that they can control the lights in the area, which I guess to now to my eyes looks like a set, but at the time they're like, of course they would set up the streets, because if you've ever seen 24-hour news gathering, and they would have seen a lot more 24-hour news gathering in the streets of London than we typically do here in the like little suburbs of Ottawa. We don't see huge banks of lights set up in mobile news gathering vans. They were new to the electronic news gathering of having the cameras on the shoulder and being able to just jog around. So that's what they did. Now they wouldn't think of doing that. Like, who wants to put your hair out of place and get sweaty doing that? But at the time, it was exciting. You know, you see a lot more of that in Spanish news gathering because they still like that kind of excitement. It seems slapdash to us now, but at the time, that was sort of the sign of the times. And while we're watching it, thinking, how much of this is scripted? Really? Are they just letting them kind of run wild here and following a loose script? No, every single bit of this was scripted. Even that what looks like an impromptu dash down the street. Like, I really do like the setup of showing people all the neat new technologies though, because that would have been a huge hook. And it is a big hook to me in any of those ghost stories because I like the technology. At this point, they're probably pretty used to whatever had been being used or going on with what the Warrens were doing with the Enfield poltergeist, following other stories because there are quips of Amityville. So even let alone the writers, but the actors and probably people watching were interested in modern ghost hunting.
It is interesting. They do evoke Amityville. One piece of dialogue very specifically, they're like, "This is Britain's Amityville," but they already had a case that was referred to as Britain's Amityville. So I was curious why they didn't really ever evoke Ensfield when it seemed as though that was what they were. Now maybe it's just because of my own. This is just what a British household looks like, and it looks exactly the same. So perhaps that's why my brain is saying, well, it's that. It's not Amityville. Amityville was a completely different situation, but I suppose not really. This being scripted within an inch of his life is very fascinating because it really shows you the level of discipline they actually had, the level of discipline that they showed by looking like they had lacked all discipline. And they were just doing a slapdash broadcast that was falling apart at the seams, and there were so many moments where it's almost as if they're trying to pad out for time, because when you guys listeners, you're clearly doing live broadcasts all the time. When you are doing live broadcasts and not a lot is happening, but you still need to fill airtime, it is one of the most challenging aspects of your job. And I have been present on in radio stations when the power goes out, when the Scott system goes down, which is what we use to choose music and stuff like that. And so you become a person with a microphone, sometimes staring dead into a camera, sometimes you are in a darkened studio all by yourself, and your job is to talk and fill time. What do you do that with? You're just going to have to make it up. And so you have to continuously try and fill that space and not make it seem like you're just rambling.
And they have it bang on, really. I don't think they could have got any sort of lightning in a bottle. This can't be redone.
No.
And like we sort of get this idea with a movie we talked about recently, Late Night with the Devil, where we know that it's fake, but it feels kind of real.
Mhm.
And they've got the beats down, they've got the idea, But there's nothing like the lightning in the bottle of this particular cast of contributors to this documentary or investigation, where it was a real kids television show host in Sarah Green. People watched her on other shows too, like Crime
Oh,
Watch
yeah.
and what was the other one, like Hospital Watch or
Hospital
whatever.
Watch, they had like an ambulance one.
Mm,
It seemed like any type of emergency
mhm.
you could have, they had a watch for it.
Yeah. So like my God, Michael Parkinson, of course, being what I think of as the show that used to come on Britain, I think it was called, on Thames TV, that broadcast on CBC all the time. We had a lot of cross-pollination with BBC and CBC for whatever reason when I was a kid,
Mhm.
but Commonwealth reasons, I suppose. So having those people, Michael Smith, of course, people like they were just playing their part, even though they were scripted. A lot of them had acting training beforehand, so they weren't just television personalities where you can just hand a microphone to these people. Same within radio. You can just hand a microphone and say, fill fucking 10 minutes of dead air. Alrighty. About what? Who knows? Anything. Whatever. Like they can do that, but they're also scripted. Apparently, from watching some of the extras that we watched, Michael Parkinson was kind of given a little more free reign to do what he does.
Mhm.
And I had likened him to uh, a contemporary counterpart in George Stroumboulopoulos, our
Mm,
CBC's own Strombo. If you've ever watched the Strombo show, he is our number one interviewer and sort of like a blueprint of how to interview
mhm,
in a casual, collected, unflappable manner.
mhm,
And I like you can't really script that, right? And he's doing that heavy lifting of making this be a relatable show that stays on the rails, that I can just decide on a whim, an apparent whim, to stand up and just stroll on over to listen to this reel to reel that we happen to have over in the corner.
There's something about what you were saying earlier about the technology that they're using, that they're and I noticed this in ghost hunter shows all the time. They're like, we're bringing the state of the art equipment to finally get evidence of ghost activity. And so you get this is an infrared light, and this is going to broadcast so we can see the heat signatures on everything. And then you're just like, whoa, that's really crazy. But then that voice in the back of your mind goes, and how does this contribute to finding ghosts? Do we know that ghosts are leaving heat signatures? How is infrared help? And so that's how come it always kind of takes the wind out of the sails, where they're like, this measures the electromagnetism in the air to see if there's any fluctuations. And then does that is do ghosts' presence alter electromagnetic fluctuations? Why do we need this?
I like the part where there's liquid on the floor and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna test it." And Parkinson's like, What are you gonna test it for?" And I love that because that's what the question is on couches across Britain who are not buying this,
Yeah.
by the way, and aren't calling and complaining yet. They will, but not yet. And they have the same question of like, well, what are you testing this for? Or what does this do? They didn't need the heat signature to see Susie banging on the pipes. Spoiler alert. They just needed a very sophisticated camera that can pan and zoom, which I can't, you know, can't stress enough. I don't think cameras can see around corners. This one almost does. So I find it a little annoying, but yeah.
Well, there's that moment when they're outside and they're like, "Can we bring the lights down for the cameras?" And then, I mean, it's a crane shot, and you have to ask yourself, there's more cameras even further back than all the shoulder cams that you guys are using, and that's when it does look like a set. But we're talking about this, Lids, in the distant future of 2024, where we know all the tricks and trades. But when we dial back down into the innocent age of 1992, we find that perhaps things weren't so cut and dry back then. But what is cut and dry is there is this tension in Foxhill, right? Because um Sarah Green is there and trying to run this household because
Mm,
um the mother, Pamela, has been shooed out of the buildings. A plot point that I actually needed you to explain to me because I didn't understand why is the reporter on site basically taking care of the children, like getting them food and drinks and keeping them entertained, and also having to be an on-site reporter. What's the mom doing? She's in a van so she can do interviews.
Yeah, I had to look at the script because there is one line that is like, okay, now Pamela's going to come out to the van, our on-site studio, our little mini studio we have outside, and we'll take your calls. And I forgot that important point. So I did have to look at the script to see, wait a second, why exactly is she? That's a great question, Wes. Why is this reporter taking care of this girl's kids? But I do kind of remember the mom saying at one point, like, with all these cameras around and these hosts and all these adults, it's the safest these kids have been in ages.
Mhm,
So it explains why she would be very comfortable leaving them there. I do like the technological touch of her being able to see the kids whenever they want, and
mhm,
they can hear her and see her too,
mhm,
because they have a little camera set up in the kitchen
mhm,
where they can see the mobile studio. Like, it's just adorable. But yeah, the idea that other people in this community have been witness to the troubles that these girls have had. They've gone over to neighbors' houses when chased out of their house by ghosts.
mhm,
They aren't being believed at school. The kids are being bullied at school. The tabloids, like you said, have had their way with him, which is typical of tabloids. They even produce the cuttings of all the stories about them that make them look like liars. And I love that because having done layout in newspapers, they do look pretty genuine and they look like really typical newspaper clippings that might have helped trick people in a way because they'd be like, "Oh, I read about that totally in the Sun because it looks like a fucking article in the Sun."
mhm.
I really do enjoy that. But I like that she is entertaining the kids. They're playing board games, they're doing kid things. It might seem that the pacing is a little slow because we're constantly going back to the studio to sort of keep the show going. Let's talk about hauntings. Let's talk about other hauntings you worked on. Let's take some calls from the audience, Wes, and hear about your cheese and pickle sandwiches.
The calls from the audience are really great. I really love how Michael Smith, who is Sarah Green's in real life husband, and they were a husband wife duo that had done a few of these watch shows together in real life. So I think it just contributed mightily to certain people being like, "Oh, this is just like another one of these situations." But I do love him kind of constantly befuddled and like fumbling over pages. He's like, "Oh, we got like 6 calls here," and he's just always has both calm, but there again, there's like such a slapdash nature to all of this, like as if none of this is prepared. Really, none of this is prepared, and he genuinely does look flummoxed by this large influx of calls that are coming. And meanwhile, Pasco, the doctor, are what did they call them in those days? Parapsychologists or
At the time, a psychical researcher,
cyclic? Okay, so you know,
a parapsychologist.
parapsychologist. Basically, she is not really offering a whole lot of answers. She's constantly alluding to previous studies and information that they have gathered. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Warrens book Demonology. If you were to, if you were, if you were to listen to Ed Warren, he was constantly talking about his thousands of documented pieces of evidence that prove all of this stuff exists. And he's always threatening it like it's in a shed somewhere. He's like, "I've got thousands of bits of documented evidence that I could show you at any time," but never really does. But you know. But the this is sort of the same boat, and the one thing that I think is so great about her pairing with Parkinson is he is so measured and like just stoic, and she, in comparison, even though I wouldn't necessarily say she's flying off the handle, she's still quite British herself, but compared to him, she seems hysterical. She seems like completely enraged. And even though she's not really expressing a lot of anger in certain situations, but she's just declaring, well, I'm very angry.
Yeah.
It's and it's and to him, he just sort of is like looking back at his chair. Sometimes he's just like cleaning his glasses while fucking
And kind of like smirking a little bit. But being quite angry is akin to boiling over with rage, because she's just not a little bit miffed or something.
Mm,
Like, it's that, yeah, stoic, reserved. She's on the BBC, for crying out loud. She's got to keep it under wraps. Her eyebrows give it away, though, every time. She is knitting them, furrowing them, widening them. I love her eyebrows. I love her shoes. I love her outfit. I love everything about this woman. I love her hair.
she looks great. Yeah.
Yeah, she's like perfect and plays that opposite to Parkinson perfectly. So they've got something for everyone. They've got something for the believer in her. They've got something for the skeptic in him. They got something for the young in her. And young women specifically would probably be looking at her like, now she's my fucking hero, because
Mm.
I would be. And like all the women in this would probably be my hero in a certain way. But then they've got something for the older crowd who is like, well, what are you being strung along by all these young people is what's happening. That's what's happening. And they could probably call the BBC and be like, why do you have all these young people running amok? Right? Like, that might have been some of the calls. I'd have loved to be on the ground floor of some of those calls, by the way. Even the ones that we have that are scripted are interesting because they're like ghost stories. People are calling them their fucking ghost stories. And I bet you people called in to the actual BBC that night with actual ghost stories. But some of the ghost stories told in this show are real. The saliva on the food kind of story, or on the doorstep, and Sarah Green's story of seeing an Indian woman in makeup kind of coming to her in a half dream. Like, that's a real ghost story, and I really like that angle of mixing. We wouldn't have known that those things were truth, but truth with fiction.
And it also helps a bit with their delivery because I know some of these people were professional actors or had actor training, but it's just so much simpler to just tell a story that you have told before in your real life in a compelling way. And like you said, that blending of reality and fiction. And Dr. Pascoe, I love every moment where she's sitting in front of a bank of monitors, and those monitors are always most of the time transfixed on the Foxhill house. And so anytime that she is trying to indicate that she's very wound up and worried and there's something off and there's something wrong, she'll just jerk her entire body because she's on a swivel chair, and she'll turn her chair and she'll just stare at the bank of monitors where she's not even, it's like she's not even aware she's on television anymore. And then she'll have this dramatic beat when Parkinson inevitably asks her what she thinks is going on, and she always will turn back and be like, I don't know. And
Which would seem like it doesn't fit. Like, no one would write that into a script, right? Because you don't have your professional numerous times say, I don't know what's going on. And I like that that helps with the believability, because we've also had things that, we wouldn't know what's going on. We've seen footage of these girls in their room and heard the banging on the pipes, saw maybe a ghostly figure, which is pointed out by the audience that's viewing at home, apparently, during this live apparent broadcast. And so we don't know really what to make of that. Was it a trick of the light? Was it a ghostly apparition? If the girls, because Suzanne is caught banging on the pipes at one point, but we know we have footage of her in her room and the pipes are making that noise. There's not another person that's involved. All three women in the house, the only people in the house, are in the room on camera while these apparitions are going on and things are going amok in the house, and then the lamp explodes. So we know that there is like a ghostly thing going on here. We haven't really been treated to it yet, because also in the back of your mind, you're like, well, now that they have all these cameras and people there, nothing's going to happen. Because in ghost shows, now that we have seen a whole bunch of them, nothing actually happens, right?
When Suzanne is revealed to be banging on the pipes, and it seems like the Dr. Pasco and even Suzanne herself will articulate that they wanted to guarantee that something would happen during the broadcast so people would stop calling them a liar. But it does seem a little bit that the air in the room has been sucked out. When you're thinking about this juncture in the story, we know as the audience that something else must be going on, because it would be less than satisfying, shall we say, if the conclusion was, okay, it is just one of the girls banging on the pipes, and they've created this whole silly story around it. But there's other things going on that will keep them compelled. First of all, Pasco is stubborn, very stubborn, but belligerently so. And this is like the most heated exchange that she has with Parkinson, and even then it's still pretty mild. But it seems as though, to him anyways, it's self-evident what's going on here. Don't we all know? And even the skeptic chimes in and isn't really doesn't gloat, but is also quite self-satisfied in the fact that, well, of course, I'm not going to say I told you so, but this is just proves my hypothesis and this, that, and the other thing. But there's still the added question of all of these calls that are coming in. Now, Parkinson immediately is like, well, they're all hoaxes. They're all just, people are hysteric because, and he even says directly to the camera, sorry if this we're certainly not trying to actually scare you and make you imagine things. And this is just we were just trying to do like a ooky spooky Halloween broadcast. Basically, it's like, very paternal, fatherly, like, get a hold of yourself. Like,
yeah, turn your television off if this upsets you.
Yeah, particularly, there was one instance where he was like, why are your children still up? It's too late for them. They should go to bed.
Yeah.
It's turn your television off right now. Who in broadcast tells their audience to turn off the TV?
Well, a respectable adult on the BBC, of course.
He's like, I would be the adult in the room. Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed. But these calls, if you pay attention, actually provide us with a little bit of information to time immemorial.
Michael Smith, to his credit, is not only telling people to continue calling, he's telling specific people to call back, because people are calling in with like, I saw this in the background. But then somebody calls in with a story of that area, that there used to be like a midwife that would just discard the children and the stillborn in a barrel near there. So it was probably just that exact place, and maybe that exact plot where those women are having all that trouble, those girls live. And it's upsetting and kind of like, it's not kid friendly material either. So it's kind of neat that they've timed this like, why are kids watching this? Kids shouldn't be watching this. This is upsetting. With the like some of the real stories, it starts to get a little gory in here too. So that call is really helpful. We have another call coming too that ties up the whole story as far as the haunting. So at this point, we understand that there used to be a woman there, and it's maybe haunted by the souls of dead bodies. It doesn't explain all the banging on the pipes or the weird cat sounds that become apparent, but the story is like, okay, so maybe there is what is the equivalent of an Indian burial ground under this house.
It's true. And also the descriptions of this entity that people are saying that they're seeing in the background can also be traced back to what the youngest daughter, Kim, was describing. And that it's a very old man, but also they're wearing a dress and the dress is black and they have buttons up there, up the front. And also their face is missing a part of it, but also their nose is quite scratched. And that seems to be what people are describing. And, Dr. Pasco is rewind the footage. Let's play this description again. Rewind the footage. Let's play this description again. And of course, Parkinson's having none of it because he's like, well, they just heard the description elsewhere. And that's how come people are thinking that this is what they're seeing. And of course, they're not seeing this because they couldn't possibly be seeing this because this is a television show and this is not real and ghosts aren't real and everything's been thought of to be a hoax. Even when Suzanne is found eyes wide, comatose in her bed, covered in horrible scratches, he accuses her of self-mutilation.
Which is, understandable given her age and given the situation. Pasco has said, they're probably manifesting this because everyone is demanding of these kids to produce the ghost that isn't haunting at the moment. They feel the need to perpetuate it. And, so we as the audience are kind of like, well, maybe she did scratch herself for that same reason, even if we believe her. And her mom's like, with fingernails, what fingernails? And shows that she's bitten them to the quick. So, like, okay, it's definitely, they look like cat scratches to me. They're all over her. This isn't the first time that she's had this phenomena because Pasco has captured this phenomena. And the other more creepy, I think, is the disembodied voice that comes out of Susie. And it is a very creepy, gravelly, ghostly man's voice that apparently can be reproduced even when her mouth is full of colored liquid and taped shut. Taped shut, Wes. It's a child abuse in this story never ends.
She threatened on television or said that in the past. She's like, I almost hit her because I was so mad that she like dropped something or whatever the fuck. I'm like, that's a wild thing to just say on fucking television.
Yeah. No. I like this point in the film, and we get another sort of pinch point like this too, where it's like, okay, this really has to be really real, and these people are terrorized and should get out of this house. Really, honestly, they need to bundle these kids up, get out of this house, and figure out what's going on. But it's a show. The show must get on the road. So, and their kids, they can be calmed down with a little bit of, or little warm milk. Everyone else needs a coffee. We should just have a coffee. We'll just get the kids settled, and we'll just hang in there. Can you explain it? No, I can't explain it. Let's just chill.
When things start out again and the banging starts, the girls are terrified. The mother has like come back into the house because she's certainly not content with staying in that van while her kids are being terrorized, and things are moving about the living room. There's this and also in classic haunting, we got the broadcast itself is starting to screw up. While the cameras are in the house, they're starting to get wonky and slowing down. That deep voice, we heard it first on the reel to reel that they played in the studio. And in my opinion, that's definitely where the horror started. When you're watching this film, it does look like a very even keeled sort of ghosts program that's really more investigative, but not actually trying to scare anything. And then when the tape starts, you're saying to yourself, or at least I was, this is where the horror movie part is starting. And when they're in the house and things are getting really chaotic, the lights are going out, and constantly walking past this glory hole. Now, wait.
Yeah, the glory hole.
Now, wait. Gang, now, hang on a second here. Sometimes words mean different things. And
this is a good example.
This is a good example about when we say glory hole, when they say glory hole. They use it in a way that I was unfamiliar with, but in their case, it's a storage area in between the walls. It's a small. We had two of them in my house growing up. One was a little closet. We called it the back closet. It was a small door in the back of our closet that opened up into the insulation in the roof and stuff like that. It was like this big empty space where the roof was. And there was one in my sister's room as well that, again, just opened up into this big empty space where you could see insulation in the frame of the house. That is what this is, but they call it a glory hole. I don't know what else you would.
I don't know. The Harry Potter closet.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
They have a piece of like balsa wood over it with a piece of trim nailed in front of that to keep it closed.
We called it the vacuum cupboard because it was under the stairs, and that's where my uncle put the vacuum in the house that had one. I mean, you could have a cigarette in there, and that would encompass a couple words that are used differently in the UK. You could have a cigarette in the glory hole, Wes.
You could.
You could.
Oh man, I'd like to think of myself as a fairly mature individual, but man, every time they say it's here, it's coming from the glory hole, I really.
What do they call a hole between two bathrooms that people engage in sex in, or in a peep show kind of thing in the UK? I'd love to know.
Yeah, does that not that have a different?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
They call it the bird's nest.
the bird's nest, the penis trap, I guess.
Penis trap.
I don't
The
know.
dick hole.
The
They
dick
probably
hole.
call it the dick hole.
That's the dick hole.
Yeah. Well, Peter hole. There's another word. Willy. The Willy.
Willy?
Yeah, Willy.
Willy Chambers.
Willy's Wonka.
Willy's Wonka's
I
Chambers.
don't know. I don't know. But yeah. Gang. Wes did snicker every single time. Every single fucking time. But they say it a lot, and it's hard to erase that because there's a lot of words used other places that you get used to pretty quick. Yeah, I'll never get used to glory hole for the vacuum cupboard. Thank you.
It is under the stairs, so so there's that. It is very creepy. There's something ominous about that door. Like there's something ominous every time you walk past that barrel and Megan's is missing or something like that. Like you just know there's something just fucking off with that. And there's a little bit of a piece of the pie left, Liz, that we need to discuss so we know the full turducken origin of pipes.
The turducken origin. And it's not even that, the girls that live down the road that have witnessed the real terror that these women are put under about the 5-year-old that was stabbed and kids that go missing around there all the time. We're like, okay, maybe people are infected by the boogeyman that this old midwife or whatever she was has become in this area. But it is deeper than that. It is, like you've often said, a hat on a hat. It is a turducken, which is perfect. So, happy past Thanksgiving to our Canadian listeners and a happy future Thanksgiving to our American listeners. Well, yeah, no, then we get another phone call that fills this in. We've been getting phone calls into Mike Smith in the trusty hotline at, what is it, 818-118-181 and 1, whatever
A
the
lot of
number is.
zeros, eights, and ones.
Yeah. So they've been calling saying that they have had electrical disturbances. They're seeing things in this thing. They're seeing pipes in their house. They're hearing banging in their houses. Then we get someone that calls in with like, he's going to crack it wide open for us because he knows that there was a guy that was renting there before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this particular person isn't on the council records, because he was illegally renting the place there.
Mm-hmm.
And he had become obsessed with the story of the old midwife and the dead children. And he said to him that there was a woman living in his body,
Mm-hmm.
Wes. And he became like obsessed, and he had dozens of cats. And when his parents went away for a while, or the people that were letting the place to him, it was
Yeah,
a
that's
relative of some sort, wasn't it?
maybe it was relatives. He was like a nephew or something.
They went away for a couple weeks, and he had eventually hung himself
Mm-hmm.
in the glory hole
He did.
in the vacuum cupboard under the stairs, the Harry Potter bedroom. And the cats had kind of,
Done what cats do when
them.
they're hungry.
Yeah, they got hungry after 12 days.
Mm-hmm.
It took them 12 days to find his body. And he often had taken to wearing women's clothing. So the children's description of this man wearing a dress that his face is somewhat destroyed, like it all starts to make sense. And the fact that he was maybe possessed. So him, Turnstile is his name, was possessed by Mother Seddons, the ancient baby farmer. It is. It sounds absurd, but it makes, okay, you've got a ghost in your ghost who's haunting your place, right? And maybe even the ghost of cats, because we're about to hear every single last one of them.
I used to hear these cats fighting for territory underneath my bedroom window when I was a kid. They used to wake me up in the middle of the night. And I swear to God, man, angry cats is one of the most bone chilling sounds. I cannot stand it. And it used to freak me out quite a bit when I was a kid. It would give me, my blood would run cold. You would hear like that at like 3 o'clock in the morning when you're a little kid. That's scary. And this is pretty harrowing. Like the chaos in this scene as they determine that the sound is coming from this small little closet. One of the daughters is missing.
Yeah.
They can't find her. And one of them, Suzanne, has clearly been demonstrated as being possessed before. The girls seem to have a little bit of knowledge about Pipes. Pipes seems to be like speaking to them directly. And as they open the door, we see a glimpse. By the way, if you have an eagle eye, you will see glimpses and reflections and this, that, and the other thing of Pipes, this corpsey looking motherfucker. He looks a little like a mannequin from like a Halloween store, like Spirit Halloween or something.
He kind of looks like a priest too, because
Kind
the
of.
first time I watched this, I thought, oh, they're describing a priest in a
Yeah.
habit. Like they say he's bald and he looks scary and stern, and he's got this buttoned up
Mhm.
black dress. I'm like, it's just a priest. It wasn't a priest,
Yeah.
but that's what it like meant to me at this point. You'll also catch a glimpse of the BBC being played in the living room, proving that it's not a live broadcast. But you have to be very eagle-eyed to have seen that as it broadcast, or even now, because I had to hear about that on that podcast that I'd listened to.
You get this sense that things are really becoming fucking chaotic.
The house is going insane, and that's my favorite part of things like The Entity, or like any poltergeist type movie, Amityville, when the house begins to turn on them. And that's what's happening here.
So we have Pipes, who is a child molester who killed himself, was eaten by cats, been possessed by an old woman, a cruel old woman baby farmer. That's our entity. And he has now harnessed the attention that this broadcast has given him and has now allowed himself access to the technology that is the broadcast itself. And he has been able to do two things with this newfound power. One, he is able to make it look like everything's okay at old Foxhill. And the girls are drinking Coca-Cola and they're playing, I don't know, fucking Candyland or whatever the hell it is they're playing.
Shoots and ladders. I don't know what they're playing. Or they're
And-
sitting around in the living room.
Yeah, and there is Sarah Green, and she's sitting on the floor, and the cameraman is there, and everything is fine. And so they think that everything at Foxhill is quieted down, and despite the fact that we know that the cameraman, the last we saw, had a fairly grievous head injury from opening up that door, he got flung backwards. No, everything's okay, but the doctor, Pasco, she determines that this is an earlier broadcast. She determines this because there was a picture frame on the wall that had been flung off, and now the picture frame is back up there. And also there's high winds within the studio of the BBC one.
Yeah. It's getting really weird. Not only have they determined that they're watching a loop, which is scary because the last thing they saw, the sound guy was bleeding on the floor, and the kids were missing, and someone might be trapped in the glory hole, and it was just like pandemonium.
Mhm.
And now they're being fed this do 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 everything is fine, and it's terrifying while things are going wild in the studio and people are calling in, and then the feed suddenly snaps back to reality without sound, and it's our intrepid Craig Charles, who is being roped into doing this outside of his comic acts, is bolting down the road toward a waiting ambulance with incoming police officers, and we get to see one of the kids being brought out of the building. Like, it's obviously shit hit the fan.
When we get into the interior, this is a really effective part of the film and a use for that infrared. We get to see the heat signature of Sarah and the cameraman who are still inside this house. The house is pitch dark. She can't see. And he is looking, it's his perspective of looking through the shoulder cam, and she's sort of fumbling away. Now, Pamela and her daughter, her youngest daughter, Kim, have made their way out of the house and are approaching a police car. And the sound guy is on a stretcher and he's getting put into an ambulance. But Sarah, the cameraman, and Suzanne, the oldest daughter, they're still in the house. And Sarah goes into this cupboard, this glory hole, in order to get Suzanne, and the door sort of just snaps shut. Now, what happens after that is anyone's guess, because we're going back to Parkinson's, and it is, if you weren't aware that what you were watching was fiction at this point, you certainly would have to know by this point that it is fiction, because the entire studio of the BBC One, their GhostWatch set that they had made for the Halloween event, is just lights are exploding this way and that. There's high winds. Parkinson's is like, well, people are literally like producers and camera operators and the phone call-in people. And Michael Smith is like screaming like, where's my wife? I need to know where my wife is. He's just still sitting in his chair, just like almost like, how we gotta right this ship? How do we rein it in so I can tell the viewers what is happening? And then all we start hearing as the screen goes black, and then one of the cameras not trained on Parkinson's whatsoever. There doesn't seem to be anyone in the studio. The last time we saw Dr. Pascal was she was just like sort of pensively looking at the Foxhill bank of monitors. And so who the fuck knows what happens to her? But it's kind of Parkinson's listlessly sort
Kind of floating around
like
the studio.
floating around the studio, like he doesn't even know if any of the cameras are on, if anyone can hear him, if he is broadcasting. And the all we can hear is him sort of fuddling like, oh, what's going on, like ladies and gentlemen, I don't blah, blah, blah. And all we can hear is like this sound of this cat yowling beginning to overtake all of the audio.
Parkinson ends up being apparently possessed because his very last words that we can understand are fee, fi, fo, fum, which is terrifying because a few other times when we've heard this voice possess Suzanne, she's said like a kid's rhyme of some sort, or what big eyes you have, what big
Yes,
hands you have. So it's like, oh God, this is the sort of like weird lure grooming bullshit that a molester might know, like kids' rhymes. Of course, they'd be adept in those things. Like, oh no. So yeah, I could see where if you cut to black right here, there's something wrong at the studio. Let's call in or call the police or whatever. If you were really taken in by this, which I would have been, and given at like, whatever age I would have been able to watch this, 9 years old seems to be the lowest age I've heard of someone watching this, to like 15, 16, 17, maybe, depending on the level of gullibility, I would have believed something terrible had happened. But the credits roll. And writer Stephen Volk, right there, black and white, tells you this was written by somebody. Written by somebody who writes fantastical stories at that. So, like, it's tough. I don't know how I would have taken it. At varying degrees of people who believed it was real within the first 5 minutes and turned it off because they were too scared, or watched till halfway through and got angry because it was real and called in, or watched the whole thing and thought, well, is she okay? And called because they were concerned. Didn't have a conversation with anyone about it. There's probably a lot of people who were just sitting up by themselves watching this and didn't know what to think, really. Talking about it in the schoolyard or the coffee shop or the office the next day. There would have been enough people not knowing what to think. Now, tragically, I should have mentioned this much earlier in the broadcast, really. Much respect to the family of the young man that had lost his life a month after this, because there were people watching this that believed it and maybe went years. Maybe even today there's people who think GhostWatch was real, but there was one young man, it was like 13 or 15 years old, that hung himself after watching this because I thought he was maybe possessed after watching this. An extremely sad story. So there was not only a level of believability that was unshakable after watching this, there was a level of anger amongst at least 30 people who filed a suit against the BBC for reckless endangerment, I guess. I don't know. Because they felt that should have been told that it was fictional.
Did the BBC ever comment on any of this after the hysteria?
Not that I know of, except to say that it was obviously fiction. It was slotted in the drama slot. It's showing at the drama time when we show dramas.
I think that's very British to just like taking the royal family cue of like comment on nothing, acknowledge nothing, carry on. But I think the fact that they never broadcast it again is all the evidence I need to let them know that, ooh, it's just not worth it. Like, even if they felt responsible, even if they felt like they had fucked up, they certainly felt as though it was bad for them to broadcast it again, or they shouldn't. It would be improper. So I think the fact that they never broadcast it again is really the loudest response as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, like, and aside from it being like preserving their artistic integrity of like, oh well, we couldn't have that much fun ever again, can't broadcast that again, it was a one-time thing. It's respect for, and I had the age wrong, it's an 18-year-old factory worker, Martin Denham, who had lost his life after this. So it's partially out of respect for that. Parkinson's elderly mother didn't know what to think either. She thought it was real. You know, people who were involved in this felt duped maybe after, and they wouldn't want to repeat that again. War of the Worlds had the same sort of fallout. I can't speak to that because, of course, I don't know anyone. I only know one person who had heard the original War of the Worlds, and he was way elderly when I was young. So Yeah, he remembered that. But yeah, I don't know if I would have known anyone else to have lived through either thing.
I don't know. My grandparents would have been alive, maybe, but they would have been super young because War of the Worlds was that 30s, late 30s, or something like that when that would have been broadcast. So it's really hard to say. And also, my grandparents weren't pop culture people. They didn't. I really didn't even really know what. Why I know my grandfather didn't really have. They didn't have much money if he had access to a radio at all. I don't know, but I think that nowadays something like this just couldn't be duplicated. Not in the sense that people can look on things online and not be able to discern what's real and what's not, because as we've seen, unfortunately, over the last since the last time you and I sat in front of each other in real life, Lydia, we've seen all too often how access to the world's information has not made anyone smarter.
No, that's very true.
But what I will say is that in combination of simply not being able to do anything but call your neighbor, like, hey, are you watching this thing? Would you know anything about this? There's one blurb in the TV guide the week before, and there's no way to verify anything that you're watching. And particularly if you're young, I would have been 9 years old when this came out. I wasn't going to go run upstairs and ask my parents about something like this. I would have just, finally, ghosts are like, because I already kind of thought ghosts were real when I was a little kid, right? All I need is the most tangential confirmation to prove what I already thought. And I think that's probably what happened here. People who already believed in the supernatural and believed in ghosts just needed one little push to be, finally there is compelling evidence here. And frankly speaking, let's not take away the fact we've saw that script. Now, listeners, if you've not seen that script, you have never seen a busier, more incomprehensible script.
Very technical.
But remember, both me and Lydia have worked in media. We know how things are made in terms of news broadcasts, both in visual and just audio. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It seemed so fucking complicated. So as amateurish as it looks, it's all by design. And so we can't take away the fact that GhostWatch was just made very well. And it did exactly what it was supposed to do. And if it's guilty of anything, they're being too good at their jobs.
I think the end of this and the social fallout in a way reminds me a lot of the end of The Howling, where they're sitting in the local and they're watching the television, and the one guy, the voice of reason, says, no, that happened. That newswoman turned into a werewolf and they shot her. And I would be that person who'd be like, did you see that? Oh my God. And have that one voice of reason, quote unquote, say to me, yep, that was real. Yeah, I read about it. I read all about that in the Sun. Yeah, that was real. Fuck. I'd have been hook, line, and sinker. So if you want to believe, you can tune into Behind the Curtain, GhostWatch Behind the Curtain. There's an ongoing blog, an ongoing mass seance every Halloween where you can prepare your cheese and pickle sandwich and have a mass seance. Watch GhostWatch at 9 to midnight, I suppose, something like that, on Halloween. And maybe, just maybe, Pipes will come visit you.
So what do we got next for him?
Coming up next, we're going to stretch Halloween a little longer. Pumpkinhead, even though it probably takes place more earlier autumn than late autumn, but we don't want to let go of this gorgeous weather and the leaves falling all over the place and pumpkin patches.
And rural hill folk and Lance Hendrickson being a good dad. We've seen a Lance Hendrickson be a good dad already. This is an even better dad because he's full of vengeance.
A better dad, but really, he leaves his kid alone, Wes. He expects a lot of this little kid. I don't know about good dad.
Listen, no one could have predicted that kids on dirt bikes would run over his son. No one could have predicted that.
Very true, very true. And well, we get some really cool monster scenes and excellent kills.
Hell motherfucking yeah, Stan Winston, like a motherfucker. I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to the very real broadcast Halloween special of Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peaver and hosted by Lydia Peaver and me, Wes Knight. We'll see you next time.